Alright, welcome everybody. You are listening to Blood on the Mic with your host, David.
And Lewis.
And this is a brand new show that we're putting together. If some of you guys might know us from different sources, from different things that we've done in the past. Some of you guys might have known us from a more personal distinction. But to introduce myself, what would I say?
He was the host of the radio show, what is it, The Sweet and Tender Hooligans?
Yeah, it's just, I shortened it to just The Tender Hooligans. Because the idea was to play alternative rock that was both loud and aggressive, but also sweet and tender. You know, it's got a lot of emotion to it. A lot of it is by, they're just troubled folks. It's just trying to get their emotions
What's the
out
radio station? Plug the radio station.
The radio station is WMBR 88.1 FM, Cambridge, Massachusetts. So it goes to the entire Boston regional area, and we are recording the show out of Cambridge, out of here in Boston, and that probably won't affect this episode in particular, but in future episodes, I think it will, because you want to tell them a little bit more about what we want to do.
Well, yeah, what we plan to do with this podcast is one aspect, a big aspect, is interviewing local bands, local Boston bands that either play in Boston or, have roots in Boston or just come by Boston at all. Like, whoever we can get our hands on, we'll talk to them and talk to them about whatever they like. But also, it might be sort of a debate show. We're going to, like this episode, we're going to debate a very popular band and two very popular albums.
Exactly. But before we get into that, I guess there are a few other things to mention. For instance, Lewis over here, which is strange because is that how we want to address each other?
I don't know. You say David, and so you said the American way to say your name, so I said the American way to say mine, but that's not really what we call each other. So right. I don't know what to do.
I'll just call you by my nickname, Luisi. And then,
yeah, and David. Yeah, we're Hispanic. I don't know if that matters. If you're racist, you can stop listening, but just keep listening. Why not? You don't see us. It's not like you'll see our skin color.
Right. And I think at this point we don't really have a strong accent either, but not that we have a Boston accent, because we're both from Florida.
I just got to Boston, so maybe in future episodes it'll start coming out.
that would be funny if we adopt a Boston accent. I've been living here for 5 years and nothing has happened yet.
I've been living here for, I think, 5 days, and I think I'm going to assimilate rather quickly. I'm going to adopt it. I'm going to go to Red Sox games, start screaming at people who love anything other than the Red Sox. I'll throw beer at them or whatever. That
would be pretty funny. So we're family. We've known each other for a while, and we both love music, so we thought about putting together a podcast about music. In the past, Luisi has done some podcasts himself with his brothers. They call it the Three Gorillas is what the
it was. Is. We tried to. My family has a long storied career of failed businesses, and one that we had before was Three Gorillas Entertainment, I guess, which this might be under if we want to. But we had a podcast called what was it called? Can I Roll for Survival? It was a Dungeons and Dragons podcast where we played Dungeons and Dragons. Then we had Friday show. This was a while ago. We actually stopped making them, so you can try to listen to them if you like. We'll probably never make any more of it, but if there's a demand, I might. So I have a short history of being a failed podcaster.
Now, with that in mind, we are going to start a new podcast over here, and we were still figuring out the format a little bit. As we mentioned, we're going to try to focus it a lot on interviews. So hopefully in the future we'll be able to get you guys some more bands in here, so that way you can learn a little bit about the Boston scene, but also just music that's coming out. And also towards the end of the episode, we'll be talking a little bit about some of the new music that has been dropping. But to kind of get to the meat and potatoes of this episode in particular, today we're going to be talking, like Lucy mentioned, it's a pretty big band. It's called Radiohead. and we were having a discussion.
They're big in England. I don't know if Americans know about them.
No, I think they're pretty big. I would say they're biggest on the internet, which I think is where most of you guys will be listening to us. So the band Radiohead, to kind of give you a quick synopsis, they started off in the early 90s, and they had a surprise hit with the song Creep, and they have continued to have a pop appeal to a certain extent, while still exploring a lot of experimental ground in their music. They released some pretty acclaimed albums in the mid to late 90s with The Bends and OK Computer, mentioned by some to be some of the best albums to be released in alternative rock music, especially in that decade. And then they took everybody by surprise in 2000 when they released the album Kid A. And so today we're going to be discussing Kid A and Amnesiac, and a little bit about those two albums and what makes them different from each other, but probably more in depth what we think about them and why one is better than the other, or etc. So
yeah, more importantly, I'm going to be proving David wrong, because he thinks Amnesiac is better than Kid A, which I think is just completely insane. Personally, that Kid A is obviously the better album. I mean, we're going to go song by song and break it down, and I'll prove how wrong he is. But that's going to be the main debate.
Yeah, I would say maybe like the wording of it is a little bit off. So there's a little bit of there's a little bit that I would have to like explain about my thoughts on Kid A and Amnesiac. So when they were making Kid A, Tom York, the lead singer of the band, also the main songwriter, he was kind of in a place where he couldn't write songs anymore. He had like writer's block, but they just couldn't. They either weren't satisfied where the band was heading, or they just couldn't create anything anymore. And so not only did they take a little bit of a break, but he was trying out a few different styles of things to get his creativity back together.
He passed me the mic right now. I'm not sure why. He knows more about the history of it.
Oh, you told me a little bit about like what they did to get the creativity back.
So yeah, they mostly tried experimenting with different forms of songwriting and different forms of music in general. At the time, Tom York, and I think mainly Tom York, was getting into IDM. You know, electronic music was huge in the 90s, especially in England, in London. So yeah, he was getting into IDM, things like Aphex Twin and stuff. So you'll hear a lot of electronic stuff going on in Kid A, but also a different writing style that Tom York was trying to do. He would write his songs and then cut up the lines and reform them into different things that were basically don't make sense because it's just out of order, but I guess it was more interesting for him, maybe broke that writer's block for him, made him able to write more songs.
Right. And that was kind of like a way for him to get out of his writer's block. He really went in a completely different direction. Ultimately, it was one of the most shocking releases, we'll say maybe of all time, as nobody really expected this band. So I'm a big alternative rock fan. My show Tender Hooligans is pretty much alternative rock, and at the time, it almost seemed like Radiohead was taking up the mantle of being the top alternative rock band of the time, of the late 2000s, of the late 1990s, early 2000s. And when they released this album that had all these electronic influences in it, this album Kid A, it really shocked a lot of people. It was also a big fact that at the time it was still the early age of the internet, and in a lot of these chat rooms that were just starting up, Radiohead was a really big discussion. And so a lot of people heard about Kid A and how there was a lot of discussion about, like, do you get it? Do you not get it? Is it like is it really as good as like some people make it out to be? Or is it just a big letdown? So a lot of the discussion was happening on the internet at the time, which kind of cements what today is known as, like, Radiohead is really like the band of the internet almost. Like there were several other things that they would do in their career.
Yeah, later on down the road, especially when In Rainbows came out and they I think they were one of the first people to do a pay what you want model within Rainbows, where they just put it on their own website and said you can pay whatever you want. But also, I think an important thing with Kid A was that, I mean, obviously the electronic influences, but a lot of these songs didn't even have guitars on them, which at the time for an alternative rock band, like, the guitar is the main influence. Maybe, I don't think people now who grew up maybe in this age younger than us, like, they're used to artists just not using guitars at all, because the main thing right now is hip hop, rap, and stuff that is like electronic sounds and electronic synths and things like that are just standard, which at the time for an alternative rock band it really wasn't. So this is super groundbreaking at the time for at least mainstream audiences.
Right. But yeah, especially like, you know, the rock audience. I guess every now and then there's a big discussion within the rock audience, whether it's, you know, in the 80s, talking about whether Van Halen should have included synths in the song Jump, or, you know, Radiohead releasing Kid A, etc., etc. For a while there was a discussion about the place of electronics in rock music, but the fact that they didn't have that many guitars in a lot of their songs kind of put people in a tough spot as to like whether it was still rock at that point.
And honestly, that could be another episode that we can do, is what is the new rock music, because right now rock music hasn't been the genre in a long time, but also there's a lot of bands out now that you could consider rock music, but people don't, because they don't use guitars, or they just use mainly electronics. A lot of stuff I hear, like, I don't know, bands like maybe 100 Gex or something, or Black Dresses, are really noisy and stuff, but they're kind of considered something else. I don't know. I'd have to get more in depth later and look at these bands more closely, but just what current rock music is, I think, could be an interesting topic.
Right. So there's a lot of ground to cover with that discussion. But what today is kind of leading to is that Kid A as an album, it's because of this writer's block. I don't think the band really had a good idea from the get-go that what this album would really be. I think they just kind of started going in one direction, and then eventually I think they kind of figured out that they had two directions they were pushing into. So in the end, they just made a bunch of songs, and they chose some songs to be on an album called Kid A, and then the following year they released an album called Amnesiac. And the interesting thing is that overall, Amnesiac sounds more like the kind of album that would follow up OK Computer. It would be a more naturally, it would follow more smoothly after OK Computer. But Kid A is a lot more out there. Is a more electronic one of the two, and it was definitely more shocking, especially when it was released. So that's kind of like what the relationship between the two is. Kid A gets a lot of acclaim and a lot of recognition because it was released first, even though the songs from both Amnesiac and Kid A were recorded at the same time, roughly. The other thing I would say is that, some people might have given Amnesiac the title of being kind of like the B-sides, because they would think that Kid A is the main album, and then Amnesiac is just kind of like the leftovers. But I would even venture to say that some of the strongest songs from that time period came out on Amnesiac. Songs, for instance, like the Pyramid song. I think a lot of Radiohead fans would consider one of their best songs. But we'll get more into the track listing in a bit.
You brought up an interesting point where you kind of just went by, where you said that Kid A has more acclaim because it was released first. Which, you know, we can't, like, if in an alternate universe, we could see, like, what if Amnesiac was the one released first? Because I think Kid A is definitely more, like, boundary pushing of an album than Amnesiac was. So, do you think Amnesiac would be the critically acclaimed one if it was released first and Kid A was, like, technically the B-sides album?
I think if Amnesiac had been released first, I think it would have been critically acclaimed. I think it's still pretty good. I don't think people would have been quite as shocked by it. There are a few songs on it that similar to Kid A have a more electronic element to it. A lot of those elements are because Tom York was getting more into people like Aphex Twin at the time. This style called IDM, or
the worst name.
Lucy, what's the name?
Intelligent dance music, because you actually have to have a high IQ to listen to the music. If you're not, if you don't have above like 150 or so, it really will go over your head. So don't even try to listen to it.
Or at least this is according to Aphex Twin, apparently. But yeah, I mean there were several other bands at the time that were also starting to get more into either electronic music or possibly. I think post-rock was also a big influence at the time. But Radiohead was definitely not the first band to kind of approach IDM from an alternative rock background. I would say that probably like Bjork is somebody that had been doing it for a while at that point, and she was doing a pretty good job at it. Not that she released anything like similar to Kid A, but like she also ventured into all these different electronic styles in a very creative manner. So I mean, one thing I would say is that like this style is very different for Radiohead and unexpected for a band like them. It wasn't a style that I think personally was like completely revolutionary in the way that some people might make it out to be. But I still think it was definitely boundary pushing, especially in the way that like maybe sometimes people think. Or maybe at the time people thought that electronic music was limited to a particular range of emotions, whether it was the club or, maybe more like pop oriented. But Radiohead made it into something that you could be sad with, and like all those other emotions that go along with Radiohead.
And also, I think an element of it was that rock fans at the time, and like. How do I put this? If something doesn't have guitars in it, they're just like, this isn't rock music. Like, it just questioned what rock music is and what rock music can be, and kind of like push their fans and fans of alternative rock in general into like, what can this type of music be? Where like you brought up Bjork, and like that's actually a great example because she was doing very similar things with like IDM and electronic music and stuff, but. I don't know if people would categorize her as like a rock artist or whatever. She was like, I don't even know what you would categorize her as. She's kind of like just does whatever she wants. But like somebody like Radiohead who really cemented themselves as an alternative rock band, like doing that is, I think that's what was the groundbreaking part of it. Was saying like, yeah, I'm still a rock band and I'm doing all this stuff with electronics. And, being the biggest one was also a big deal too, the biggest rock band.
Yeah, I get what you're saying with that, for sure. Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm taking away a little bit too much out of it, but over here, either way, we are comparing the two albums, and they're at the end of the day, I will say, maybe they're not even quite as different as some people make it out to be. I went through and actually long before we even thought about doing this episode, I kind of got all the songs together from these two albums and try to like organize them in a manner that was it was a lot more closely related to how they sounded. And I actually first I did that where like I kind of like I put them together in a way that they group similar songs together. So the songs that sounded more similar to OK Computer with more guitar heavy instrumentation, and then the songs that were more IDM inspired, more closely together, and on like that. And
so in your version of the album, what were like the sections? Like you said there was like the OK Computer type out songs and then the IDM songs. So like what were the major sections of your album?
So it would start off kind of like in the. It would start off first kind of like in the I will say the first half of the album would be more of the OK Computer type songs. I would say the most obvious example is a song like Knives Out. But there's other songs on there like Optimistic that I think also have a lot more similar of a sound to 90s Radiohead. But then I would group other songs together like Idiotech, which is the most obvious electronic example. But other songs like Morning Bell and Kid A together later on in the album, almost as a way to like, maybe it's more of like a less of a shocking approach and more of like a smooth transition. Like you start off the album, you kind of get a little bit of what you expected. It's not like anything too out of the ordinary. And then as you go deeper into the album, you kind of start reaching their more boundary pushing and more experimental, at least for themselves, material. And then at the very end, just kind of wrap it up the same way that Kid A is wrapped up with a motion picture soundtrack, which is kind of like a very nice way to like just finish off the album. It's very much a closer type of song.
I agree. I also think motion picture soundtrack is just one of the best songs Radiohead have ever made. And also Pyramid Song. There's a couple songs on here that are really like Radiohead highlights like of their career. I would say Pyramid Song, motion picture soundtrack, Morning Bell. I don't think David agrees with me on that one. How to Disappear Completely is also, I think, a defining song for them.
I do actually like Morning Bell, but it's like a little bit of a discussion in terms of like there's this is like one of the more salient points in the comparison between the two. You look at Kid A, you look at Amnesiac, and they both have Morning Bell, which is one of the things that made it seem like Amnesiac was kind of like a B-sides collection. Both because it was just like a different version of Morning Bell. But I think both versions are pretty good. Although I think we kind of came to an agreement that Morning Bell, the Kid A version, is I would say maybe better.
It's okay. It's obviously better. Like the Amnesiac version of Morning Bell is, I don't know. It's just like it's kind of like an idea. It's barely a song. Like you hear the ideas of Morning Bell in it, the lyrics and stuff, but it's kind of just like airy, floating around. It has a nice tune, but it just sounds kind of like, to me at least, like a demo of an idea. But then the Kid A Morning Bell, you know, they really settled on what like a good form for the song, the kind of like odd rhythm. It's like a 5/4 rhythm, and it kind of sounds a little, now that I'm thinking about it, it kind of sounds a little bit like trip hop to me. I might be wrong, but it just sounds like that to me. I don't know. I think it's clearly a much better song, but David thinks it's like closer.
Yeah, I don't think one is like overwhelmingly better. I mean, I do really like the Amnesiac version. Because generally, I think what it comes down to over here in this discussion is that I like the vibe going on in Amnesiac more than the vibe going on in Kid A. And this is kind of strange to say because I do think that Kid A is probably a stronger album the way it's put together. There are a couple of songs on Amnesiac that are, I think, probably unnecessary to put on either album that I think would have been better in a B-sides collection. But
and the same probably goes for Kid A. At least Tree Fingers, I think, is unnecessary.
Right, and like, even though online I know that there's some people who will say that they're fans of Three Fingers, they're really just people who like ambient music and they just don't know it yet, and that's why they like it. But I don't think it's like spectacular as an ambient song. The thing about Amnesiac is that it does feel a lot more similar to the 90s Radiohead, and maybe that's why it might be something that I tend more towards. But in Kid A, there's an overall sense of, I kind of feel an overall sense of being like isolated. I think I once read somebody describe it as the computer has gained sentience. just like a computer that has gained sentience is the way that he had described it. So it's very, yeah, to me it sounds like somebody who has kind of like gone numb or devoid of some of emotions, but they also have very deep emotions about that in itself.
But you don't like that because that's like a selling point for me.
It is something that makes the album a lot more special. Because like I feel like that feeling is a lot more special than like if they had just divided it into like the guitar album and the electronic album. I think it wouldn't have quite gotten the same effect. I think Kid A, the way it was arranged, has a very particular effect that that comes out of it. And so as an album as a whole, I do think that it has that strength going for it. But if I was to break it down song by song, or just generally like getting to the core of what each album is, I like Amnesiac a little bit more. I just think that Amnesiac got thrown in with some songs that weren't quite as up to snuff. And that it could have done with, for instance, instead of having there's a song that I could throw away over here. I mean, Hunting Bears is an obvious one to put out, but even a song like Pull Revolving Doors would have taken that and instead taken Optimistic, which I think is a song that is thrown into Kid A, even though it feels a lot more at home, at least to me, on Amnesiac.
Yeah, it does have that more Amnesiac sound, but now that I'm thinking about it, like, I think why I like Kid A lot is that it kind of sticks out, like, it sticks out like a sore thumb in the Radiohead discography where they didn't really do anything else like this. And, like, each Radiohead album is kind of different, but they have similar sounds, whereas Kid A was, like, really, really different, and, like, that kind of isolating mood that you get from it is just, I mean, to me it's captivating, and I think it works much better. It works very well as like a whole album experience. And yeah, look, Amnesiac has good songs on it. Pyramid Song is an amazing song. Knives Out is great. I Might Be Wrong is great. Like, there's a lot of great songs on it, but ultimately it's just a bunch of great songs and like a B-sides collection or just compilation. And I won't take that away from it. It has a lot of great songs, but it doesn't give you the full experience that Kid A would give you.
Right, okay, so I agree that Kid A will give you a more unique experience. Yeah, I mean, maybe nowadays there are other albums that have maybe gone for a similar effect as Kid A. Although none particularly come to mind, but that might also be because it's not, at the end of the day, it's not the sound that I personally enjoy or go for quite as much. I think it's an interesting experience to go through, and maybe every now and then I'll go back and listen to Kid A as a whole, from start to finish in that package. But like as I was saying earlier, I rather take the best songs from each album and kind of imagine that like a super album would have been released out of it instead. So cut out some of what I would have considered just some like the extra fat that could have been trimmed off, and instead taken all the more solid songs into one. I would say probably at the time like CD length record, so a little bit over an hour. That is a little bit long, I would say, probably for what most bands released at the time. But
I don't even think Radiohead has ever had an album that long, have they? It's always been like 45 minutes around there.
Yeah, I do think so as well. I mean, just generally a lot of bands tend to stick to that, that more of an LP length of like 40 to 50 minute range. And I mean, over here, both of these albums stick to that. Kid A is 49 minutes, almost 50. And then Amnesiac is 43 minutes. So yeah, I mean, combining the two, and trimming away some of the unnecessary ones. We talked about tree fingers, but also hunting bears, pull revolving doors.
But now that you're saying this, the majority of the songs you're trimming are from an Amnesiac. The only song that I would take away from Kid A is Tree Fingers. Then from Amnesiac, you take away Hunting Bears. What are the other ones? So Pull Revolving Doors, Hunting Bears, the Amnesiac Morning Bell. Like, you're leaving most of Kid A, so you're kind of just saying yourself that it's a better album.
I think it was So I don't know how to like not corner myself over here into this.
Too late, you already did.
So yeah, from like if I was actually like if it was like an actual debate, I think definitely I have like a more of like a tougher time trying to state that Amnesiac is better. But like I do think that a lot of the disparity, I would say, because like I think they're a lot closer in quality than most people give it credit for, and considering they were both made at the same time, I guess my main takeaway is that okay, maybe if Amnesiac was released first, I think Kid A probably would have been rated higher still, just because like we said, if it came out the way that it came out, it would have still had that same kind of set of emotions attached to it. While Amnesiac is less conclusive, I would say, the way that it's packed together. But if maybe what I'm trying to say is that if I kind of wish maybe that they had released a different album, an album that had more of Amnesiac at its core, and maybe less of some of the things that make Kid A, I guess, stand out the way that it does.
I have a question. What do you think is better Radiohead, post or pre Kid A?
Well, for me, it's pretty clearly pre Kid A is what I think is better. I mean, OK Computer is one of my favorite albums. Even The Bends, I would say, is pretty high up there on my list. So having those strong feelings about those two albums, I even listened to most of the B-sides that were recorded in that era. So like I have a lot more of attachment in the more guitar oriented sound, and less so in the IDM direction.
Yeah, because I think I probably lean more post Kid A as my favorite Radiohead stuff because, you know, obviously OK Computer is an amazing album, but to me it's like the best of what 90s alternative rock can be. Like, it's like the pinnacle of 90s alternative rock. And whereas I think the stuff after that is they're still doing alternative rock, but they're trying to push it in different directions and trying to bend it into what they think it can be or different versions of it. So, I mean, I guess that stuff's just more interesting to me than just, like, 90s alternative rock. And I think it's an amazing album. So is The Bends. I think The Bends is great, too. But again, it's just, like, 90s alternative to me.
I mean, I think that's maybe a little bit, it's like simplifying it maybe a little bit too much. I think OK Computer was still very boundary pushing. I mean, what really makes a lot of the stuff on Kid A, for instance, like Idiotech or Morning Bell different is, I guess that it combines some elements from like other genres that were not in rock. But in a sense, so does OK Computer in some regard. But it really sticks out over here because the instrumentation is different. In the use of drum machines and samplers and synthesizers and keyboards. They in terms of like the instruments that they use is a lot different of a palette. Whereas I wonder if they had performed all these songs with a standard instrumentation set, like like a drum set, guitars. I wonder like how different it would have actually sounded in terms of composition or structure compared to their previous stuff.
Well, I think You might be right with a lot of their songs. I don't even know how Idiotech would be played like with a regular rock assortment of instruments, because Idiotech samples like one of the first electronic songs ever, like some 60s or 50s electronic experimental thing. I can't remember what it is now, but it does sample it and stuff. But I don't know, but I think that was the point of Kid A, is that it does use different instruments and different orchestration and different stuff than just what a standard rock song would do at the time. I think they just got tired of that format of just saying like, okay, we're going to play drums, guitar, and bass, then maybe throw a synthesizer on top if we're feeling like being different or doing something like that.
Yeah, so you're actually right. I did look up over here that they did sample Mille de Lays. It's a computer music piece by Paul Lansky, and he wrote it while at Princeton University.
Is that in Boston?
No, Princeton University is in New Jersey, I believe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was hoping we could rep for Boston while we're here, but I guess not. I'm sorry.
No Boston representation. Maybe not yet on this episode. But yeah, I mean maybe this is like, maybe that's my hot take on Kid A and Amnesiac. Maybe it was also a little bit different because even though I might have listened to Kid A once before Amnesiac, I really got to know Amnesiac better first. And those were the songs, I got to know that version of Morning Bell first. I got to hear songs like Pack Like Sardines before I heard Everything in Its Right Place. And so to me, listening to Kid A after listening to Amnesiac is definitely not quite as maybe mind-blowing or as shocking. And also, I mean, I listened to both of those albums long after listening to In Rainbows. In Rainbows is actually one of the first Radiohead albums that I listened to, as I was pretty young when it came out.
I remember that album coming out, because I think it came out in like 2009. And
2007 is when it came out.
Oh, 2007?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I must have been like, I don't know, I was like 13 or something at the time, but I remember it coming out, and I was like, I was into Radiohead at the time. I think I would listen to like OK Computer or something, that's it. But like, I remember, I mean, In Rainbows is my favorite Radiohead album. But, but now that I'm looking at, that we're doing this in-depth look at Amnesiac and Kid A, I kind of see like an interesting thing that happened that, I mean, maybe it's already been said by other people, but like, you know, a lot of bands have like a transitionary album, like when they're switching sounds from like one thing to another. There'll be some album in the middle between two albums that like it doesn't know what it is, and it's kind of like pushing into two worlds. And I think that's what Amnesiac is. But I think the interesting thing that Radiohead decided to do was like they made that album and then just threw it out and said, we're just going to go with this thing without having a transition in the middle. We're just going to throw Kid A out first, just with no transition, and then put Amnesiac out later because they still liked it. But like, if they'd had that more standard, like Amnesiac first and then Kid A, I mean, I don't think Kid A would have been as much of a shock. They'd be like, oh yeah, they could have seen that transition coming. Where if it was straight, you know, OK Computer to Kid A, there's just like, what's going on?
Yeah, I would say that's probably like a simple way of explaining it. Yeah, I mean, it definitely does seem that way. If you go like song by song, you'll see there's a few songs that were definitely like, if you're talking like that way, like the Amnesiac phase and the Kid A phase, like there's some songs on Amnesiac that actually sound more like they could have fit in Kid A. Like, yeah, I mean, like we talked about it, Packed Like Sardines, or we'll say maybe even like Hunting Bears, maybe, I don't know, but there's really Pull Revolving Doors, I would say. Packed Like Sardines and Pull Revolving Doors definitely feel more along the same branch of experimentation that like Idiotech and Even songs like Three Fingers would have been in.
And even Life in a Glass House, in the sense that it also uses that jazz horn section that what's it called, national anthem uses.
Yeah, those two songs I really think kind of come out of the
same. They were probably in the same like studio session where they probably just had the same band do them both, like the same horn section.
Yeah, and so yeah, those two definitely come from a similar vein, and I think that's one of those two pairs of songs, National Anthem, Life in a Glass House, I think definitely tie the two albums together. I mean, that's one way you know that they were really like working on that at the same time. Those two songs I think are great, and I think that had they released one album instead of two albums, I think both of those songs should have been on there for sure. I think that's probably one of the things I like most that they did new in this era.
So, do you have any final thoughts? I think I'm the clear winner in this debate because Kid A is obviously better, but do you have any final thoughts?
The final thoughts I would say that in the end, I understand why Radiohead did what they did. Although I personally wouldn't have released these songs in this way. I think that there's a lot of the songs on Amnesiac are songs that I think deserve more attention. Although I can understand why some people might be a little bit dismissive of Amnesiac, understanding that Kid A was the original, the main album that was first released. Yeah, so I mean, like taking this set of songs, I would have released it differently to include more of Amnesiac into Kid A, and I wouldn't have tried to create the same kind of effect, the same kind of isolating and emotionally alien effect that Kid A has. But yeah, I would say maybe that's like my final take on it. I will put up a link if possible with this recording of my playlist that I kind of put together, so you guys can kind of see for yourselves like what ordering of the album I would have liked it to be.
Look, I'm gonna be dismissive right now of Amnesiac. You can take Pyramid Song, Knives Out, and I Might Be Wrong. Release those as singles. The rest you can scrap, and then just have Kid A. To me. And I like the other songs on Amnesiac, but I think Pyramid Song, I Might Be Wrong, and Knives Out are the only really essential parts of that. Like, to me.
I understand your point.
Did I just win?
No, I don't concede to it. Because, like, I mean, I talked about Life in a Glass House being a great song. I also really like Dollars and Cents. And I also do enjoy You and Whose Army. And even like Spinning Plates is another one that I wouldn't just do away with. Had they released those songs as standalone singles, or even as like possibly like an EP, in addition to Kid A, that would have been a way to release it, and that wouldn't have been the worst thing ever. I think it would have been a pretty solid EP, maybe one of the possibly amongst the best EPs, because that's how strongly I feel about some of those songs. But yeah, I mean the way it was released, I would say Amnesiac was a little bit stunted in the way that it was released, and even the way it was mixed, I think it could have been mixed better.
Yeah, it was kind of designed to be like the little brother of the two, and like assholes like me are gonna say it should just because it came out after Kid A. But, I mean, I think it works well as its own album. It is a good album. I'm not going to say it's not.
Right. Okay. So that's pretty much, I don't know. I don't have anything else to say about these two albums, like, at least for now.
So you're not going to concede defeat? You're not going to say that Kid A's better to the microphone?
No.
Okay, let's move on to new music.
Alright, so, yeah, let's move on over here. Alright, so today we're going to talk about a new record that came out. This new record is the well, it's not even that new at this point. It's about a month old.
Yeah, it came out a month ago, but, we're just starting our podcast now, and we want to talk about it, so we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, but I think a month is still pretty soon. Maybe it felt a little longer also because this album got so much acclaim as soon as it came out, and there's been so much anticipation. And of course, we're talking about the Fiona Apple album, Fetch the Bolt Cutters. I think a once-in-a-decade event of a 10 out of 10 rating from Pitchfork.
Yeah, and I guess I was one of the people that Pitchfork grabbed because I saw it. I've known about Fiona Apple, I guess, for a long time, and I just never really listened to her music. I don't know why, but I saw that Pitchfork gave this album a 10 out of 10, and I was, curious, so I listened to it. So this was actually the first Fiona Apple album I ever listened to.
On the other hand, Fiona Apple has been... I'm a huge fan, actually, of Fiona Apple. There was one time that I actually started a fight at the radio station because I... to not get too deep into it, we have a band of the week, and I picked Fiona Apple as my band of the week. And there were very strong feelings in both sides about that pick.
I need to hear this story, because did you almost get in a fist fight because of Fiona Apple?
No, it was an internet fight, so it was over email, really. But a lot of the old heads at the radio station, because my radio station has people that are both as young as college aged, and people who are actually we have people who are in their 60s and 70s. But most of the people I was talking to were mostly in their 50s, and then some people in their 30s. And the kind of older crowd, I guess they got the impression from Fiona Apple from her first release, the album title, back in 1996, back when she was still featured prominently on MTV with her song "Criminal," and I guess they kind of associated her with a lot of the other female performers at the time, maybe like Jewel, or maybe Alanis Morissette. Not that I think those are really bad comparisons per se for her at the time.
And honestly, I think that's one of the reasons why I've been kind of dismissing her this whole time, is because when I heard Fiona Apple and the only song I heard from her was "Criminal," which I think is a good song, but I'm just she's just one of those 90s singer-songwriter, female singer kind of things, Alanis Morissette, Jewel kind of thing.
Right, but the two albums she released right after that, When the Pawn, and I'm not gonna go ahead and say the whole name. I think it holds the title for longest album title, for maybe not quite the title, but I think for a while it did. That album and Extraordinary Machine, she got a producer, John Bryan, and she also, her songwriting just got a lot better as well. She kind of became a darling of the indie rock scene at the time, so which is why a lot of these friends of mine fellow DJs who are in their 30s, they know her for that time period, much better than the time period of Tidal, and for them it was an obvious pick to have her as Band of the Week, especially because her last release before this one, The Idler Wheel is Wiser Than the Driver, The Screw, blah 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 blah, also a very long title. That album was fantastic, and I think everybody recognized that at the time. So I was surprised that there were still people who weren't believing in her and how good her music is. But I think this time around, I think while some people might still have their own opinions about Fiona Apple, and it's fine if you don't like her. I'm not the kind of person who to tell people, no, you're wrong. This is good music.
That's what I'm here for.
I will say that definitely getting this 10 out of 10 from Pitchfork is nothing short of a statement about her artistry. But this album just dropped. Fetch the Bolt Cutters, her first album in 8 years. Pretty normal for her release schedule at this point, and obviously very excited about it. But surprisingly, I haven't listened to it quite as much as the person who has never listened to her before. So actually, Lucy, tell me some of your thoughts about this album.
So, like I said before, this is the first Fiona Apple album I've ever listened to, and I really like the album a lot. I don't know if I'd go 10 out of 10 like Pitchfork, but I think it's actually really great, and I like it because it's pretty... I think she's a great songwriter. I think a lot of the songs on here are really strong, and like lyrically, she has a lot of interesting topics. Like her song, which one was it? Newspaper? Yeah. Newspaper, where she kind of talks about her feelings with like her ex-boyfriend and his new girlfriend, and she sees the same way, like the same shitty way that he was treating herself. He's seeing that in his new relationship, and she feels a bond to this girl that she doesn't really know, but she just knows that treatment is going on, and she can't really say anything about it. I think that was a really interesting, like, lyrical concept, and like that I haven't really seen anywhere out, and in any other songs, and she fleshed it out really well. And just the sound of this album is pretty spare. It's mostly just, piano, drums, and bass, and some guitars. But also, there's a few songs that have like really interesting percussions that sound like Tom Waits to me, and like they're kind of just banging on everything. And I don't know. I don't think that's really common for Fiona Apple. I mean, I haven't listened to all her albums, just this one and The Idler Wheel. But, that might be a new thing for her. But just overall, this album sounds pretty raw. And it kind of just stands on its good songwriting and her great performances that, she really puts her all in when she's singing. What do you think?
So I've listened to this album a few times already. Maybe not enough to know the songs quite as in and out as maybe you do at this point, but enough to have formed some sort of an opinion. It's definitely a very good album. Cannot take that away from it. And I've only liked it more and more as I've listened to it. So definitely recommend for you guys to check out. But yeah, I'm not quite at the point where I can say it's a 10 out of 10. But yeah, it definitely does not disappoint. We waited a long time for her album releases, and every time she puts out herself really out there. She really, in every one of her albums, she puts her whole self emotionally onto the album. A lot of the songs are related to love. I think that's a very strong topic in most of her songs. But she does it in a way that's very different. She is very honest about her emotions and the way she expresses herself. So it's not anything. She gives like the ugly side of love as well as like the more. Yeah, actually, a lot of it is ugly. To be honest.
Well, I think it's mostly the ugly side of love. I don't think there's like a "oh my god, I'm in love" song in there. Like it's just like, "oh fuck, I was in love." That's not good.
Right. I think that's especially as the years have gone on. I think that's been more of an overwhelming feeling in her songs. But something that I've always loved about Fiona Apple is that her music is. She produces this music kind of like in a bubble, in a sense. She knows what she likes, and maybe throughout life she'll pick up different influences over time. But she works at her own schedule. She does not try to keep up with trends, and even though she might influence some people along the way, I don't think that she's not really like a part of the scene so much. She's kind of like a standalone artist and crafts her own style. Right now, maybe she does seem a little bit more with the scene, but that I think happens to be more of a coincidence.
Do you think? Because I'm thinking, I don't really know of any albums out right now or recently that kind of sound like this, but maybe you do. Because she seems like what you were saying, like kind of to the side of the scene. She's not really following anything. She's kind of just doing her own thing, like to the side of the indie scene.
Right. I mean, I'm not gonna say that nobody sounds like her right now, but the scene that I'm maybe thinking about is right now there's a very strong bedroom pop scene. A lot of female songwriters, and even though they don't really sound quite the same as Fiona Apple, they have that same kind of put yourself fully out there in the songwriting, and to the point of even probably sounding vulnerable. And I mean, I think maybe a lot of them do take influence from Fiona Apple, even though, for sure, one of the things that I think, especially in this album, distinguishes her is her percussion. You talked about Tom Waits' percussion style. I was talking about how on the last song, On I Go, there's a lot more of a marching band drumline style of percussion. And I guess to answer your question, Fiona Apple, her production has changed over the years. We can talk more about that some other time. But with her, percussion was not really something that was fully a strong focus until maybe like the last album. The Other Wheel definitely has some songs that had some more interesting percussion to them, but nothing quite to the level that Fetch the Bolt Cutters does. Fetch the Bolt Cutters, I would say that like one of the things that I marveled at from listening to it has definitely been the percussion. Just every song, some more than others for sure, have this really gripping percussion elements.
Yeah,
to it.
it's really like forward in the mix. It's like kind of prominent in the songs. Even if it's not like super interesting percussion, it's really like forward in your face kind of percussion.
Yeah, and something that like maybe she had hinted at in the past, but over here she does fully, is that some of her songs are kind of formed around a groove or kind of like a repeating pattern. And even though the song itself doesn't, like you were talking about.
Honestly, that on some songs it's really a downside because there's some like shorter songs that kind of like have like, I guess they kind of just focus on a groove, on like a motif, and like it doesn't really form into anything. And like there are bands that and other artists that do that well and like form a strong groove, but I don't know if she really like captured that super well on the songs that she tried to do it. But they were interesting songs. I don't think they're terrible.
Maybe as a fan of hers, I'm kind of glad that she is trying out this. I would say I would have to listen to these songs a few more times, just to make up my mind in terms of like how, whether it was worth it or how well it fit with the album, or how good the style is compared to like her usual style. But even like, going past percussion, I mean, we talked about songwriting a bit. The one piece of songwriting that stood out to me is maybe on Fetch the Bolt Cutters. She says that she needs new shoes to go running up that hill, but she wants to run up the hill. And that might have gotten lost for some people, but it's a very clear allusion to Kate Bush from her song Hounds of Love, which is funny because she has some of her own hounds kind of barking in that song. But I think that's from knowing Fiona Apple so well through her music, that kind of hits at me, her expressing her artistic desires, her artistic goals to kind of reach those same levels as Kate Bush did in Hounds of Love, which at the time it was kind of a groundbreaking album for a woman to make an album like that, but even through the decades it still holds up as like one of the high watermarks of female-made music. And I think the fact that that's still like the mark to hit, I don't know, it just kind of shows her place where she views herself within music, within her own craft. And I personally think that as a career, at least, she's definitely closing in on someone like Kate Bush and her importance. But that's also coming from somebody who's a big fan of her.
Well, yeah, and like you were saying, I can also see her influence in, like the vulnerable female, like bedroom pop song rock writers, like maybe Soccer Mommy or somebody like that probably has that same kind of vulnerability. Yeah,
I would say something like that. And then her vocal delivery is also pretty interesting. She has a lot of interesting things that she goes through. A lot of different styles that she goes through in these songs. I mean, I'm surprised to hear a song like Shamika, for instance. Not surprised so much, but like it is nice to hear, different styles. We talked about some other songs that sound maybe a little bit more soulful. I think Ladies was the one that sounded more soulful. And then I don't know if you were a big fan of this, but I don't think you were. But like the song For Her, it kind of sounds like Hot Knife for me in a sense that there's a lot of there's a lot of harmonizing with a lot of different vocals. It's a very vocal oriented song.
Yeah, that's one of the songs I didn't really like a lot because it didn't like evolve into much for me, but I didn't hate it. It was interesting.
Yeah, and I think the other standout that I saw was Heavy Balloon. I think was a very interesting direction that she took. And they're very, very, like the song name implies, is a lot heavier than her usual stuff. But Overall, I would say this is not a disappointing album. Can't give it quite a final rating on it yet or anything, but definitely a strong recommend on my part.
Yeah, I would recommend it. Go listen to it, especially if you've never heard Fiona Apple before, because this made me like Fiona Apple.
Yeah, that's I think that's high enough marks from my end. Is there anything new that has come out that you wanted to mention as well, or any other comments that you had?
No, this is like the newest thing I've been listening to recently. Can't think of anything else. JPEG Mafia just released a new single, Cutie Pie. It's good. Listen to that if you like JPEG Mafia.
Alright, cool. So for me, this has definitely been the big release lately, but maybe next time we can come by and tell you some other songs that have been coming out. But yeah, over here, we are now closing in on our first episode, and hopefully next episode.
Yeah, listen again, please. I would like it if you came back and listened to us. If you want, or if not, I guess don't, but please do.
Okay, well, we'll see you guys next time.